Hello, I'm John Karoulis, and welcome to Insight. The United States has its first black president. We all know this, but what does it mean? Really, what does it say about the country as a society about race relations? Today, Chip Gallagher has studied racial issues for close to 2 decades. He's the new chairman of LaSalle's Department of Criminal Justice, Social Work, and Sociology. Welcome, Chip.
Thank you, John, for having me.
Right. Before we get to this monumentous election of 2008, I want to talk to you, ask you, how did you get involved in studying racial and ethnic questions?
And I think my initial interest was in questions about equity in labor markets. And it took me to a path where I was studying issues about access to employment by race. And that moved me towards another direction, was looking at racial inequality more broadly, and then to where I am now in terms of studying how people construct the idea of race and what race relations means in terms of attitudes.
Does it say anything about the attitudes at our present state, the fact that President Obama was elected, the fact that we have a black man as president of the United States now?
Oh, I think absolutely. I think that it's truly, as you said, I think it's monumental in what it means. But I think before we get too self-congratulatory, you have to kind of look at what attitudes, how we measure attitudes and what they mean. And if the history of attitudes in the United States is an interesting thing. If you look at what they call social distance scales, they simply measure how willing are you to be next to someone that's different from you. So it could be riding a bus next to someone. It could be having your child attend an elementary school with someone. It could be having a boss that's someone, maybe a different skin color. So we look at these scales, and what we find is that as you find yourself becoming more intimate, there's greater social distance. So you might share a bus ride with someone, and it's fine. You may find it fine to be in elementary school with someone across the color line. But as you start talking about marriage or your children marrying across the color line, there's still very much race matters issue kind of work at play. And I think that the size of the white population that voted for Barack Obama, I think, is indication that people's feelings about race have liberalized. But I think that that needs to be understood in the context of what was going on in American history.
What was happening in 2008?
Right. And I think that, well, I think a number of things were happening. I think that certainly there was people were ready for a change. Although this was Barack Obama's theme, I think that the idea of change, we had 8 years of administration that many people felt has done serious damage to the United States and abroad, our economy, our social standing globally. So you had a kind of perfect storm that we had a very unpopular war that increasingly the U.S. population has voted against. We had the collapse of Wall Street. Prior to losing 700,000 jobs last week, we were shedding jobs at an unbelievably rapid rate under the Bush administration. A lot of people were concerned about the eroding of civil rights, wiretapping, Guantanamo. I think cumulatively that the administration, there was something that everyone could be mad at. So Barack Obama was able to very, I think, easily cull together disparate political factions and kind of assemble them together about anger and angst about what had been going on. So you have the perfect storm of politics, economy, and then things like Katrina, people were bothered by. I think people were also bothered by, we had a number of, we're having it now with peanut butter recall. And you might seem like, well, that's not a big deal, but it is a big deal, because what it really means is that the government basically isn't doing its job. We had E. coli, we had a number of health scares involved salads, I mean, the list is long. That basically means that the federal government wasn't doing what it's supposed to do, and that is regulate. And I think that people feel that it's great to make money, and capitalism is fine, but you need to protect people from greed. So we saw the collapsing of a bridge in Minnesota. That basically shouldn't have happened. If you have people that are inspecting the infrastructure of the United States, are inspecting peanut butter factories, as they should, then you won't have people dying. So I think cumulatively that people felt that we had moved in completely the wrong direction. So you have this perfect storm that sets in place something that is really quite historic, and that is the election of a black man to the White House. And I think even that, I mean, realize that, 58 million Americans didn't vote for Barack Obama, but nonetheless, a sizable part of the white population, 45%, did. But even that is interesting, because if you look at who was more likely to vote for Barack Obama, it breaks in certain ways. There's a youth vote, and I think that it's important to note that people that are under 30 have a different sensibility than, say, me. I'm actually over 30.
Same here.
And my parents and my grandparents. This generation has been weaned on seeing black and brown folks in positions of power. And now a lot of it is make-believe. A lot of it is like Bill Cosby. So they have seen black faces in high places in positions of white-collar privilege, and they've gotten used to it. If anyone that is under 30 has ever watched a show called 24, I'm sure a lot of kids have, it's President Palmer. There's a black president. Actually, it's interesting that there's now a female president there. I mean, so TV is always slightly ahead of the curve. It's never radical, it's never subversive, it's always just a little titillating. So they're always just having a gay character, having a black character. But it doesn't lead, it follows. And it's smart to do that because they have to sell soap. They're selling packages, they're selling products. So TV and the people that basically run attuned to who is watching. They don't want to.
And the under 30 is a desirable demographic.
It's absolutely because they spend money, or they get their parents to have them spend money. But yeah, they have disposable income. And so this population is different. It's different in some real ways that I think are important. And for example, a sizable part of this population believes that all or most of the civil rights goals have been accomplished. So the kinds of things that Martin Luther King outlined, something we should strive to, they believe that they've been accomplished. Young white Americans believe that institutional racism is a thing of the past. That is, blacks or Latinos or Asians can easily get a job without skin color being an issue. They can move easily into the suburbs without that being an issue. That the schooling they get in elementary school and high school is equal to the schooling that they get in elementary and high school. And these are just not true. There is no shortage of social science literature to suggest that discrimination and racism and institutional racism is alive and well in the United States. Certainly this is not 1950, it is not 1850. I think only a fool would argue that nothing's changed. But to suggest that we have reached the promised land where colorblindness is the norm, as I think some people now are evoking with Barack Obama, is really a very poor read of the social science data.
All right. Briefly, before we go into break, 44%, I think, of white Americans voted for Barack Obama. Frankly, I was a little disappointed it wasn't 50, but 44, is that about what you thought? Is that more than you thought it would have been, or what's that figure speak to you?
Yeah, I was surprised by that number as well. But no, it's interesting also that if you look at how the vote broke for Barack Obama, it's so much about lifestyles that there are certain neighborhoods that are very predictive of how you vote, and it really goes across the color line. So we have this kind of idea that the United States is broken up into blue and red, and it's very easy to do, but it's really much more complicated than that. People vote on lifestyles.
All right. Please join us when we talk more with Chip Gallagher about race relations and America's first black president. Please join us. That was 7 minutes.
Hi, I'm Major Samantha Weeks. I get to live my dream every day of being an Air Force fighter pilot and flying the most advanced aircraft in the world. Before I could ever climb into the Thunderbird F-16, I had to prove my flying skills through intense training, hard work, and determination. The road to my goal was long and challenging, but the reward is out of sight. You too can live your dream and accomplish anything when you set your mind to it.
They're from small towns and big cities. Hometown heroes with courageous hearts and unstoppable dreams. Hi, this is Laura Briner. Got a big dream of your own? Choose from over 200 careers in the Air Guard and let your future take flight. 1-800-TO-GO-A-N-G or goang.com.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in local schools. They were at Bunker Hill, Gettysburg, Iwo Jima, Quezon. They've been under the sea and to the moon. They stand watch in Korea. They keep drugs away from our shores. They patrol our skies every day, every year. These are your sons and daughters. You see them in church and at Little League games. But they are special because they work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
Welcome back. We're talking with Chip Gallagher, Chair of the Sociology, Social Work, and Criminal Justice Department here at LaSalle University. Chip, you just don't teach race studies. You actually make students do work at it in class assignments, some interesting things. What are some of these activities or non-activities you have our students do?
Well, I try to rotate different assignments that I think quite deliberately will get students kind of out of their comfort zone and force them to think about race in ways hopefully they haven't had to before. Nothing dangerous, but most students, and this is white, black, Asian, most students grow up in environments that are racially segregated. And increasingly, in fact, our neighborhoods are looking more segregated. We're actually resegregating schools and neighborhoods. And when I ask my students, tell me about your neighborhood, it's typically 95% white. Their churches are almost all white. Their elementary school is white. Their high school is majority white. And so what I try to do is to get my students to think about what it's like to get out of the bubble that you were raised in. And so I do different assignments. One assignment I do is students have to do a relatively long bus ride from all the way from one edge of South Philadelphia all the way up to the top of Philadelphia in Chestnut Hill. And they do a rapid ethnography. And they go through the neighborhoods and they see which neighborhoods have Whole Foods, which neighborhoods have pawn shops, which neighborhoods have shishi restaurants, which neighborhoods basically have storefronts that are abandoned. And they have to do an analysis of these neighborhoods in terms of the history of the city, the resources that have gone into some neighborhoods and not others. And what they have to do is look at why is it that some neighborhoods look the way they do? Why are some neighborhoods gentrifying? Why are some neighborhoods not? So they become mini race experts, but they also become urban sociology experts as well. That's one assignment that I like to do. Although students don't like, it's an extremely long bus ride, so they're not always so happy about it. Assignment that I just started actually today is a media blackout assignment. And as of today, my students for 3 days will be doing a baseline. And for 3 days, they have to collect information on every contact they have with electronic media. So they have to record every minute they're on their phone or texting or Game Boying or iPodding or Googling. So everything, every moment they're on. And quite honestly, I've done this assignment a few times. It's anywhere between 6 and 9 hours. It's way more time than you can possibly imagine that our students are connected to the media. So for 3 days, they basically get a nice baseline about how much they're connected. And then for the next 7 days, nothing. No TV, no phone, no text messaging, no Game Boying, no Googling, nothing. There's some provisions. If your mother calls, obviously you can talk to your parents. But I tell them, tell your parents you won't be calling every day. Set up a time once every 3 days. They are not allowed to use anything. And then they have to think about how they use their time, because it's really a large amount of time. So this is an assignment that gets them to think about, as Marshall McLuhan said, the medium is the message. And this is the idea is that the phone itself isn't what's going on. It's that you're tethered to the phone and your life is organized around checking the phone. So they find that they're actually going through withdrawal. And they aren't able to talk to their friends about what was on. American Idol was on last night, or the big game, or they don't have a cultural reference point from the night before that everyone was watching. So it creates these voids, these vacuums. And they have to think about, what does it mean? And they have to do research on sociology. Sociology has a large literature on the sociology of media. And so they have to look up the literature and look at what exposure to the media does and mean in terms of social relations and Facebooking. So it becomes a really fun assignment, but students don't like the assignment because they are really angry that they had to give up what's something they're used to. A lot of these kids have had a phone since they've been 12. So for them, it's their blue blanket. It's their adult blue blanket, their little binky. And so this is slightly torturous, but it's a lot of fun.
Do you have a goal in mind? What do you hope the students bring from both assignments, the long bus ride and the media blackout?
Yeah.
What do you hope they accomplish or find out?
Well, all my assignments do something that's a little different. The other one assignment I didn't talk about was the race talk assignment. They had to surreptitiously collect information about how their friends talk about race. So when they're in their dorm room, or with their buddies, you know, on the field, or they're at a frat house, or they're home with their parents, how do people talk about the racial other? And they have to, so no one knows, secretly take notes about what Uncle Joe says or Mom or Dad says. And they collect this for 2 weeks. They keep a journal, and they had to go back and look. And unfortunately, what they typically find is that people are a lot more racist than they think. But what typically happens is you give Uncle Joe a pass because he's your uncle. Oh, that's just Uncle Joe. Or my dad doesn't really mean that. But when you start to collect the data and you look at it, and you look at it over and over again, that Dad said this, or Mom said this, or my brother said this, all of a sudden you start to think, wow. And this is, again, this is every racial group has something to say about the racial other. And so what students understand is that here we talk about being a colorblind nation, here we talk about, oh, well, people don't say these things anymore, but the reality is they know they do. And when they start to really take an inventory of it, they realize that people are much more racist than they could think. So each one of these gets, hopefully, my students to think in ways that they're forced to think about a topic in a way that they never have had to before. What do you do with your time when you can't watch TV? So that's some of the things I'm trying to accomplish.
Any radical changes among your students from the beginning to the end? If students actually told you that this opened their eyes up to something they never thought they'd see before?
Absolutely. I have had my, with the media assignment, I have had students just shocked at how much time they were wasting. And a lot of them told me that week, oh, I was really a better student, I read, I picked up the guitar, I volunteered at my church. All of them do something different, that they understand that poverty just doesn't happen. Right. That these are institutional arrangements.
Right. More with Chip Gallagher when we return. Please join us. That was 9 minutes.
Okay.
Flew by. That's great.
Good.
It's when
likely to cause a sunburn.
What you need to know is UV light from indoor tanning can cause
premature aging, including wrinkles, sagging, and age spots.
So instead of making you look cool, it can make you look old.
And even worse, UV light can increase your risk of skin cancer, including melanoma, the deadliest form of skin cancer, especially when exposed at an early age.
And treatment can be surgery, and sometimes even chemotherapy and radiation.
In fact, current estimates are that 1 in 5 Americans develop skin cancer.
And 1 person dies from melanoma about every hour.
I don't want to be one of them. I don't want to be one of them.
I don't want to be one of them.
This message brought to you by the American Academy of Dermatology.
I'm telling you, indoor tanning is not as safe as you think. In fact, indoor tanning is totally out.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school. These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
I joined the National Guard and never thought I'd be saving lives.
It's more than money for college. It's built my character and given me a sense of accomplishment. career path, and I'm the leader of my team.
I put on the uniform and I have a whole new outlook on life. Country, community, family. That's what matters most to me. If that matters to you, go to 1-800-GO-GUARD.com.
Gallagher, chair of the Sociology, Social Work, and Criminal Justice program here at LaSalle University. Chip, getting back to two things. Philadelphia, 3 of its last 4 mayors have been African American. And that's not uncommon among many big cities. But what does it say about Philadelphia and its status of race relations and racial equality?
I think it says that Philadelphia mirrors what many other cities have done. And I think cities are actually a very good bellwether for how groups are assimilating. And you can look at any major city, New York, Chicago, Philadelphia. What happens is that a group comes in, and the new ethnic group, and typically because new ethnic groups tend to be laboring class, they're often Catholic, and they are young, so they typically have large families, and you have basically kind of a spike in the population. So when Italians came to Philadelphia or New York, all of a sudden you produce LaGuardia, and you produce a Rizzo. I mean, what happens is that groups' time comes with size and the ability to get out the vote. Now, of course, historically, blacks were completely disenfranchised, so we really don't see this happening until this. Really think about it, it took 300 years for blacks to basically get their foot in City Hall. And haven't even made it to the State House, really, in any ways yet. It wasn't the same for different ethnic groups, certainly the Irish in Chicago, the Irish really all over the Eastern Seaboard. So I think what happened was that we have Maynard Jackson basically starting us in Atlanta as basically the first black mayor of a big city. And what the effect was, there are 2 things. One, white flight, that the cities were, in fact, more black and less white. And with that, with size comes power. And as Rizzo did, he basically, and Daley did, he brokered the vote. And the idea is that you basically bring your people out on the day where there's an election through walk-around money or lots of ways to do it. But what it shows is that at some point that once the kinds of the institutional racism that kept blacks from voting was lifted, they organized politically. And of course, I always like the line from Atlanta, because I just moved back to Philadelphia from Atlanta, was that when Maynard Jackson died, one of the things he said was he produced a lot of black millionaires. And he did that by basically making sure that the blacks that got him into office got city contracts. And of course, that's exactly how Philadelphia worked. It was basically ethnic patronage. So it was, who you knew. And so what we're seeing now with the same kind of thing is with basically a population that's voting one way. Although we should say Rendell was elected in these 4 positions also. And we have now Mayor Nutter, who's, I think, quite good. But it shows the pattern of every group historically, that you basically demonstrate that you've made it by being able to get your toe, and then your foot, and then your whole body, and then your whole group into City Hall, and then the State House, and then, of course, the White House.
Right. Okay, the White House. Not long ago after he was elected, one of Barack Obama's daughters said, well, you're the first black, so you better be pretty good at it. Which, of course, will be the burden for any woman, Hispanic or whatever, who assumes that office. What are some of the pressures he's going to be under because he's black, whether or not he's effective or ineffective?
I think it's a double standard, quite honestly. President Bush, I think is a very honest, good person. But quite honestly, his presidency is going to go down, and the American public already has given him basically, I think, pretty much a seal of disapproval. And what I'm reading from the most eminent historians in the country is that he's going to be rated as one of the worst presidents ever, bar none, bar Grant, anyone. But he doesn't represent the white race, and I think that's the double standard. When President Bush fails, and he did, people just say, oh, well, he was just, he was someone that basically, the Peter principle, he shouldn't have been there, he got up too fast, he was a place that he couldn't handle, but it doesn't become some kind of indictment on all white men in the United States. He's seen basically as an individual and not representing a group. Barack Obama is representing a group because he's the first. And it is the kind of double standard that happens all the time in corporate America. The first female fill in the blank, the first female head of a department in a hospital, the first female senator. The old line is that for folks that have been on the margins, and by margins I mean if you can imagine the United States, the kind of center of gravity for the United States has always been culturally white, male, educated, Protestant, straight with children, and landed. And anyone that wasn't in that little group, if you can imagine that circle, basically is somehow signifying symbolically what America was. It's like the idea that America is white. You know, you don't have to say a black doctor. You say a doctor, and you assume the person's white. If you weren't in that ring, you basically had to demonstrate that you should be in that ring. And so you have now, and I'm sure I have this conversation with my students. You know, someone said, "Well, shouldn't we be colorblind?" I said, "Of course we should be." And they said, "When should we even talk about color?" I said, "Well, when it's relevant." And so the question is, do you need to say black doctor or female dentist? We tend to use those adjectives because we're not used to them. We're not used to the black doctor or the female dentist. And I think black president is, right, this is 44, so he's #1 of 44. Right. So there's going to be a double standard. I mean, if John McCain had been in office right now, we wouldn't be talking about race because it would be more of the same. I think Barack Obama has basically been left holding the bag. I mean, economically, every single way, this person is going to have to really, really be very smart about handling the economy, and we have a three-front war right now. But he's going to be held to a different standard. If he screws up, they're going to say, "Oh, just like a black guy."
But if he succeeds, conversely, would he get
extra credit? I don't know. It usually doesn't work that way. But certainly, you know, he's certainly a very, very sharp guy. But you know, sometimes it's just being, you know, the first in your class or being a professor at law at University of Chicago doesn't really prepare you for what the White House is going to give you.
Exactly. We've been talking with Chip Gallagher, chair of the sociology department here at LaSalle University, about race, ethnicity, and the historic election of Barack Obama. The next 4 years, possibly 8, are going to be pretty interesting. We'll have to have you back and keep maybe a report card of Mr. Obama and how he does.
Fabulous.
And how we do as a society.
Yes.
Thanks for being on.
Thank you very much for having me.
See you next time on Insight.